Hey guys, remember Fate Stay Night? That excellent visual novel that had this remarkable battle royale concept that revolved around summoning renowned spirits of yore to do battle with each other for the mythical holy grail, and how it has this fascinating introspection about ideals that are explored ultimately with Shirou in the three routes of the visual novel, with it also delving into how broken and fascinating of an individual Shirou is. Also remember how Fate Stay Night ended on such a satisfying note? You know what the next logical step would surely be? A sequel. A sequel that not only takes place after the Holy Grail War, but one that has most of the characters who supposedly died in that Grail War returning due to how the 5th Holy Grail War has restarted. Wait, what? Yeah, you wouldn't expect a direct sequel for a game like Fate Stay Night with how conclusive that game felt when you're going through it, but somehow they managed to release a fandisc for the original Fate Stay Night named Fate Hollow Ataraxia, which is a sequel of sorts. Well, kind of. But despite the strangeness of realizing that this sequel is real, there's only one question we have to ask when looking at the game: is it good? Or to be more specific, does this fandisc expand on what we already know about the original Fate Stay Night, with it still being able to retain its own identity? Or does it fall within the rehashed unnecessary sequel department, with people being better off not even giving it a chance? Well, fortunately it's the former, with it doing a lot of things that not only expand on what we already know about the original Fate Stay Night, but as well as doing an excellent job of differentiating itself so that it can stand on its own, not only in terms of story, but as a game itself, strangely enough. Well, I guess saying that Fate Hollow Ataraxia being entirely standalone isn't exactly a true statement, with how it's pretty mandatory to have beaten the original Fate Stay Night before you can fully enjoy Fate Hollow Ataraxia. I'm just saying that Fate Hollow Ataraxia has its own story that it wants to tell, its own identity, with it also expanding what we already know about the original Fate Stay Night. But that's enough introductions, let's start delving into the game, shall we? Hello, I am Peter47890/Sirus, and welcome to my review of Fate Hollow Ataraxia. Fate Hollow Ataraxia is a visual novel that was developed and published by Typemoon. It's available on both the PC and PlayStation Vita, though it never got an official localization outside of Japan. Now let's talk about the gameplay of Fate Hollow Ataraxia first, since the gameplay of a visual novel is usually its least important aspect. With that said, you would expect the gameplay to be very minimal with how this is a visual novel, with the only type of gameplay to expect in this game is mainly just reading until you reach a point where you have to make a decision, with said decision determining if you're able to progress or get a pretty gruesome end. At least it was like that in Fate Stay Night. Now if you guessed that, you'd be wrong to a degree. Granted, you do spend a lot of time reading through the game since Fate Hollow Ataraxia is still at its core a visual novel, but there are still quite a few stark differences between Fate Stay Night and Fate Hollow Ataraxia. Differences that you wouldn't expect to see, such as the structure in both games being pretty different from each other. Not to mention that Fate Hollow Ataraxia has minigames, which makes it different from most visual novels, even though those minigames are not the focus of the game. So yeah, Fate Hollow Ataraxia does have its stark differences, but let's talk about the differences now, shall we? Structurally, Fate Hollow Ataraxia has a pretty open structure to it, with how you can view and activate the many events that happen in the game, which is a deep contrast to what you see in Fate Stay Night. How it works is that there's a map screen you'll be traversing in, where there'll be a variety of events you'll be able to click on in the map, which allows you to view that event. Though there are some events that takes place in the same location, with you having to decide what cutscene to activate once you go to that location. Additionally, there's also a time cycle mechanic in the game, with it determining what events becomes available to see depending on what day it is, as well as what time it is during that day, with you advancing that cycle every time you activate a cutscene, though there is an option to skip to a specific time within that time cycle. With that said, there is a 4-day time limit with the time cycle, with the game resetting on the 4th night. Well, it also resets if you get a bad ending. Once the time loop resets, you'll be back where you were on the first day, though any events you experienced in the previous time loop will transfer, meaning that you can not only skip events that you've seen before, but also continue multi-part storylines that will require you to go through multiple events. Well then, how do you progress the main story then, you ask, if the game resets itself on the 4th night? Well, there are key events that you're supposed to activate, and once you do them and experience another time loop, the main story progresses, with the current time loop having changed due to what you did in the previous time loop, with more events and even locations becoming available to you. Now this might sound strange and weird, especially with how there's a time loop plot device ingrained into the story, but go along with it. It makes sense why it works out like that in the context of the story. There are also some minigames that will pop up throughout the story that you can play again by accessing them in the main menu, with these minigames ranging from Harafuda, a 2D side-scrolling game that you might recognize if you watch Carnival Phantasm, and even a quiz minigame. But yeah, that's the structure of the game overall. It's certainly different from the original Fate Stay Night, with how open the structure is as compared to the linear structure of the original game. You still progress the story linearly, with how you have to activate certain cutscenes to even progress through the game, but the game is intentionally much more open with its structure, with how there's all these side stories to view alongside the main plot. There's just much more opportunity to go off the beaten path and to explore stories that are not entirely integral to the main story, which again is a contrast to what we saw in the original Fate Stay Night. Now, is this openish structure done well? Because we all know what matters in the end is the execution. I would say yeah. For one, the game does a great job of not only allowing you to skip any events that you've already seen before, but as well as showing you which events are new in the map screen thanks to the small icons that appear next to the event icon, with these small icons signifying that it's a new event entirely. There are even small icons to tell you if it's main story related or not, and this is all due to the well executed user interface that the game has. I also like how you're able to go to your desired day with ease due to the skip option allowing you to go to a specific day or time to view a particular event that you may have missed in a previous loop, either that or continuing a multiplayer storyline. That ease of use is just excellent in a visual novel like Fate Hollow Ataraxia. All these traits in the overlying structure overall are just great, since it allows you to view all these events that are in the game, both mandatory and side stories, at your own pace, and without wasting too much of your time to get to those events. You never feel like you're wasting needless time going through the map system in the game when you're looking for cutscenes to activate, which is overall a great thing. It's simple, straightforward, and just an effective map system overall to tie all these events together. The minigames are also pretty fun to play, especially the Operation Ilia Castle minigame. Now most of the enjoyment from the minigames is in the Fate Stay Night references you can catch in them, but mechanically they still work pretty well. Though the only one I'd probably talk about in length is the Operation Ilia Castle minigame, since the other two minigames are pretty simple games as compared to the Ilia Castle one, where you can see some work was put into its construction. As for if you would enjoy the other two minigames, well, one is a quiz game and the other being Harafuda, which is already a card game in the real world with its own rules. So if you like playing those, you'll probably like it here. But now let's talk about the castle minigame. Now like I said before, the Castle Ilia minigame is pretty fun with just how crazy it is, with there still being some skill involved in learning how to play through the minigame, which does make it an engaging experience to play through. It's not just random clicking, there is a method to the madness you see, with the process of learning that method being fun. Well, fun enough for a minigame at least. Overall, the gameplay works pretty well in Fate Hollow Ataraxia mechanically. But the question to ask is, does it work for the story, since this open structure is somewhat abnormal for a visual novel to have. So does this freeform pacing fit the story of the game? That freeform pacing fits the story pretty well actually. The freeform pacing, how you're looking for new events for the sake of seeing something change in the time loop, as well as seeing something new emerge, all these elements I'm describing contribute to the themes and message that the game is trying to convey. So overall, the structure works well for Fate Hollow Ataraxia. Now, are there any problems to the gameplay of Fate Hollow Ataraxia, outside preferences of it being a visual novel? Well, if I must be nitpicky, I do find it annoying how every time you complete a time loop, you end up back in the main menu, with you having to click on start to continue your playthrough of the game. I think a better option would be having the game just starting you into another loop, without having to go back to the main menu. Well, that might just be me. Now, this is nowhere an actual problem that detracts from the game. Like I said before, this is a nitpick.
反則イラストその4ラストセイバー編リン 遠慮ながら進言があるのですが。
Let's now talk about the overall presentation of Fate Hollow Ataraxia. Now in regards to its visuals, I think the game looks pretty good. Now most of the assets in the game are from the original Fate Stay Night regarding its character sprites and backgrounds, but Fate Hollow Ataraxia does add new elements in relation to its visuals, such as seeing characters having additional sprites that have them showcasing their casual clothing, as well as having sprites that give new character expressions, and not to mention they added more backgrounds to the game. Add in how there are new characters added in the game, newly crafted CGs, and it's apparent that there are quite a few things unique in Fate Hollow Ataraxia as far as visuals are concerned, even if the game is reusing assets. Now those old assets still look good in their own right, it's just that we've seen them before. Regardless, the visuals in this game overall looks nice and appealing to the eyes, with the character sprite work and backgrounds having good art design to them. The character sprite work for one feels distinct and striking, with the new sprite work that was added to the returning characters from Fate Stay Night doing wonders to add even more life to the characters that we know and love. Seeing these characters in these new clothes and giving these new expressions that are reflective of the setting really makes these characters feel more real. It also helps that these new designs are in line with what we think these characters would wear if they were given a chance to live in a modern society. That and these new designs do look pretty good on the character themselves. At least I think so, at least. The character sprite work you see in the game is also drawn well, and they still feel distinct somehow despite having a very familiar design to them. There's just something with Takashi's design that allows his characters to stand out, to have their own identity to it, despite these designs feeling familiar. Well, that's what I think anyway. Another aspect of the sprite work that I like and want to bring up is that the game does at times try different styles of sprite work, with those sprite work being used to pull off some comedic moments in the game, such as seeing the over-the-top sketchy, chibi-like sprites used whenever to highlight an over-the-top comedic moment, or seeing the unique sprite work that is in the theater scene. As for how effective they are, I think they work extremely well due to how the comedic sprite work contrasts with the normal 2D sprite work, which further emphasize the comedic moments of the game. There are just some legitimately funny moments done with the comedic sprite work in the game that's just a joy to read from start to finish. But overall, the sprite work done in the game is just excellent, not only in regards to how they look, but also with how the game implements them. The backgrounds are also well drawn, with there being a variety of them. Not many complaints about them in general. They're nice to see and they're used well within matching the tone and context of the story. The next thing I'll talk about regarding the visuals is probably the visual effects that the game has. Now the visual effects are done pretty well. They do a remarkably great job of amplifying what's happening in a particular scene. Whether something is funny, action-packed, or intense, the visual effects alongside the sound effects and CGs do an excellent job of immersing you into the game. You honestly do get sucked into the moment as a result, which is a great thing to do when you're experiencing a story. Speaking of CGs, they're great to witness when they do appear. They're drawn well and do a great job of highlighting the hype moments that happen in the game. I also like how the CGs convey progression and even movement for the scenes that they are in, with how there's multiple CGs for a specific scene that allows you to see how that scene plays out visually as time goes on. Now this aspect about the CGs can be said about the Fate Stay Night CGs as well, but I thought I'd bring it up here since I forgot to do so in my original Fate Stay Night review. Overall, Fate Hollow Ataraxia is pretty good in the visual department, with the visuals doing a great job of complementing the story of the game. Now to talk about the sound design of the game, I say it's pretty well done. The sound effects, like I said before, does a great job of complementing the story, with there being appropriate sound effects that match perfectly for what the story calls for at the time, whether that be the various ambient noises they use to indicate the surrounding area, or using a sound to indicate an action, such as hearing a van drive off in the neighborhood, hearing the over-the-top sound effect that they use for the comedy bits, or even hearing a door being slowly opened. The sound effects in the game are just used to excellent effect. I think the sound effects that are the most effective in the game are the ones that are used to indicate a harsh or intense moment, like the static effect they used when the story is revealing an ugly hidden truth to the reader, or hearing the various heartbeat sound effects that plays throughout a tense part of the game. These type of sound effects are just great in providing an unnerving feeling during certain sections of the game, which is good and gets you really sucked into the story. The soundtrack itself is also great overall. It's relaxing, it's fun, silly, and over the top. It's dripping with this atmosphere and melancholy nostalgia. It's intimate, it's intense and harsh when it wants to be, as well as being triumphant in moments that are appropriate. The soundtrack overall does a great job of covering all the different type of mood and tone that is in the game. But at the same time, the game knows when to not play music and just let the sound effects, scene, and visual play out to build up the appropriate tone and atmosphere that the story calls for at the time. So not only is the soundtrack good to listen to in this game, but it's also used incredibly well. But if you were to ask me what my favorite tracks on the soundtrack are, then I have to say the standout tracks for me are the one that sets up atmosphere in Fate Hollow Ataraxia, such as Mirage and Legend having this warm and nostalgic atmosphere to them, Church of Rubble having this grand and majestic feel to it with it also invoking this foreboding uneasiness within it, or Stranger having this calm and melancholy feel to it. Tracks like those that set up atmosphere stood out to me when I was playing through the game. Overall, the soundtrack of the game is pretty enjoyable, with it doing a marvelous job of fitting and amplifying the story. Now for the voice acting, I can't say much of its quality since I don't know Japanese. I mean, I think it sounds great and everybody sounds like they should, but then again, I don't know the Japanese language, so I can't critique it fairly. What I will say though is that the voice acting you hear in Fate Hollow Ataraxia with the recent voice patch is pretty much the same cast you heard throughout other Fate related media concerning the main cast of Fate Stay Night, such as Noriki Sugiyama voicing Shirou, Kana Ueda voicing Rin, Noriko Shitaya voicing Sakura. I think you guys get the picture. So you can at least expect consistency at the very least, which is good for a well-established series like Fate. With that said, if you still want to hear my thoughts on the voice acting, I will say that Noriki Sugiyama as Shirou has some remarkably funny moments, with his performance nailing those moments for me with how animated he can be during some of those funny scenes in the game. Another standout is probably Atsuko Tanaka playing as Caster, most notably the segment where we find out about her past and finally see what happened to Team Caster in the Fate route, since that was left open in the original Fate Stay Night. Atsuko Tanaka's performance during that moment was just so moving and heart-wrenching, just so good. Well, at least I think so. Now to talk about the vital parts of a visual novel, which is to say its story and characters. But before I start discussing the story and characters, I must give a mild spoiler warning for the original Fate Stay Night, since it's kind of hard to talk about the story of the game without spoiling Fate Stay Night to a degree, unless you make the video very generalized. I tried to avoid mentioning the vital plot points from the original Fate Stay Night, but know that I pretty much will talk about the Master and Servants from the original Fate Stay Night, since the game pretty much assumes you already know who they are, with the game not even bothering to hide the fact when you're first playing through it. Now with that out of the way, let's start talking about the story and characters, shall we? Now the story is kind of weird, at least with how the story starts out on Shirou's end. Oh yeah, I should mention that Shirou isn't the only character you'll be playing as in the game. Well, he kind of is, with how the gameplay portion of Fate Hollow Ataraxia only gets you in control of Shirou, but in regards to the narrative, you'll also be following another duo as well, namely Bazette, a magus who was sent by the Mages Association to participate in the Holy Grail War, and a mysterious new servant who's linked to Bazette. Anyway, the entire premise of Fate Hollow Ataraxia revolves around how the 5th Holy Grail War has restarted, despite it having ended 6 months prior in the previous game, with the aftermath of such an event being an interesting one, with how most of the servants and masters who were dead in the 5th Holy Grail War are now alive and well. Not only that, but they're also living normal, peaceful lives due to how each of the servants feel like they have no reason to fight in this restarted Holy Grail War now, with us seeing that each of the servants is just doing their own thing in this restarted Grail War and not actively seeking each other out to fight. With the masters feeling the same. Granted, not every one of them is back and well, mostly just one isn't back and the other is in the background. that you don't really see. Oh yeah, got to mention that Rin is also away from town due to her magical experiment with the Zelwish jewel sword, prompting her to go to the Mages Association in London. Yes, an experiment with that jewel sword. An experiment, mind you, that ended in failure, with the result having possibly warped time and space. Let that sink in. Well, there are also other reasons Rin goes to the Mages Association. The point is that Rin isn't in town at the start of the game, and that everybody in this restarted Holy Grail War doesn't feel the need to fight against each other. But if you think everything's going to be peachy now, with how most of the servants and masters aren't actively looking to fight each other, then you'll be in for a surprise. Because despite the tranquility that is the result of the masters and servants wanting to continue the peaceful lifestyle they are now accustomed to, something is still amiss within the town of Fuyuki, with how there are these mysterious shadow-like creatures that appear at the dead of night, with these creatures being an anomaly in the Holy Grail War. Add in how there's a 4-day time loop, and the mystery that comes along with that time loop, such as wondering how Shirou is able to retain trace memories of the previous loops when the time loop restarts, and not to mention how this entire restarted Holy Grail War is an anomaly in itself. And it's apparent that something strange is happening, and we essentially play as Shirou in this part of the story as he tries to find out what's going on in this restarted Holy Grail War. On the other end of the spectrum, we are also playing as Bazette and her servant as they try to win this restarted Holy Grail War, with them also possessing the ability to retain their memories when the time loop restarts. But with this restarted Holy Grail War being more than it seems because of all the weird occurrences that are happening in it, it's apparent that our unlikely duo is going to be put through the ringer as they try to fight in this restarted Holy Grail War, with them also trying to figure out the mystery behind it. That's also not to mention that our dual protagonists aren't all that compatible it seems, as well as Bazette's memory being a bit groggy. And yeah, Bazette and her servant are in for quite an intriguing ride. Well, that's the story synopsis, so how is the story overall? Is the story told in Fate Hollow Ataraxia worth reading through, especially if you read the original Fate Stay Night, and does it justify the game being a sort of sequel to the original game? Well, you already know this answer since I already answered at the start, but I should probably go more in depth about what I said earlier about Fate Hollow Ataraxia not being entirely standalone. Namely asking if you need the full context of the original Fate Stay Night in order to enjoy Fate Hollow Ataraxia. I would say yes. For one, there are quite a lot of instances within the story that pretty much require the context of the original Fate Stay Night to have its full impact, such as the diary scene with Sakura not being nearly as funny if you haven't played through the Heaven's Feel route, or the reveal of Bazette's servant identity not being as impactful if you don't know the implications of both his real name and his class designation. Mind you, this reveal is done pretty early on in the story, but the indications of such a reveal are pretty significant from having played through the original Fate Stay Night. Secondly, Fate Hollow Ataraxia pretty much expects you to know all the character depth that was in the original Fate Stay Night, with how this game dives more into the characters that didn't get explored as much as some of the main characters in the previous game, such as Caster, Sorichiro, Ryder, and even Lancer to a degree. Now don't get me wrong, these characters were used wonderfully in the original Fate Stay Night and had interesting personalities and roles within the previous game, but it's apparent that they didn't have the spotlight like Saber and Archer did. So yeah, Fate Hollow Ataraxia does require you to have played through the previous game in the end in order to fully enjoy it. Now let's talk about the story and writing now, shall we? Now in regards to talking about the writing of the game, we will have to split this section into talking about the slice of life scenes and the main plot, which revolves around Bazette and her servant and their journey through this restarted Holy Grail War. Well, let's first talk about the slice of life elements of the game. How are they? Now, people who've played the original Fate Stay Night might be a bit wary about the slice of life elements, since the slice of life scenes in the original Fate Stay Night wasn't so hot. Well, mostly the cooking scenes. Albeit there was a decent amount of slice of life scenes in the previous game that helped further develop the characters, as well as providing some lovely character interactions, but let's be honest, the cooking scenes sticked out like a sore thumb with how there was quite a lot of them that felt like filler due to how a good amount of them felt like they didn't further develop the story or characters, like at all. Besides knowing that Shirou specializes in Japanese cuisine, Rin in Chinese cooking, and Sucker with Western dishes if I remember right. There's also the fact that most of this game consists of slice of life scenes, which can also be alarming to some people. So how does the slice of life elements of Fate Hollow Ataraxia stack up to Fate Stay Night? And more importantly, are the slice of life elements enjoyable? Thankfully, Fate Hollow Ataraxia slice of life elements are executed excellently, with them never feeling like padding that wastes your time. Now, the premise found within these slice of life scenarios can seem typical for the setting, such as seeing Lancer going fishing, Caster coming over to Shirou house for cooking lessons, Saber playing a soccer game, Shirou hanging around the school and interacting with his schoolmates like Issei, Shirou going to the pool with one of the main heroines, because of course there's a scenario like that, etc. But even if the premise itself is typical, the execution is what makes a lot of these slice of life scenarios to be so enjoyable. One of the aspects that make reading through these slice of life scenes to be interesting is partly due to the surrealness in seeing how all the servants who were involved in this battle royale in the previous game would now behave in this game's warmer and more relaxed setting. To see how these heroic spirits of yore will adapt to modern life is just extremely interesting, such as seeing Caster, who was this major player in the 5th Holy Grail War in the previous game, at least for one of the routes, is now trying to be a diligent housewife in this game. A housewife who frankly might not be that good in housework. Seeing events like these is not only interesting because it's such a role reversal, but also because it's entirely believable to see these heroic spirits doing what they are currently doing, given their personalities and motivations. It might seem absurd at first, but once you think about it, it makes sense why these servants are in their current roles. It makes sense why Caster would want to be a diligent housewife, given her relationship with her master and what her wish was back in the original game. It makes sense why Lancer is doing his own thing and is fishing on the docks, given his playful and carefree demeanor, etc. The fact it seems believable to see these returning characters doing what they're doing really add credence that these characters that we know from the previous game are now living in a different setting, rather than these being new characters altogether. Which is a good thing, because not only does it add to the surreal factor that I talked about before, but it also makes these characters feel more well-rounded with how we're seeing this new aspect of them that we didn't get to see much of in the previous game, an aspect of their personality that we could only have seen in this game's relaxed setting. With this aspect feeling believable, ultimately it feels like we are currently observing a side to these characters that we haven't seen before in these slice of life scenes. Well, for a decent amount of the servants at least, which in the end adds even more layers to these returning characters that we know and love from the original Fate Stay Night. The most notable example probably being Ryder herself, with how we're able to see more facets of Ryder's character in these slice of life scenes. From seeing her more sultry side be put on display in her interactions, when Ryder either wants something or when she's trying to elicit a reaction, to seeing what Ryder's demeanor was like when she was with her sisters when she was alive. Elements like these do a great job of making Ryder into a more well-rounded character in Fate Hollow Ataraxia. It makes her feel more relatable. It was just fascinating to me personally to see Ryder more human side in this game after seeing how badass and loyal she was in Fate Stay Night. Well, more so on the Heaven's Feel route. Not to mention Ryder also gets a ton revealed about her in this game, with you learning how fascinating of a character she is once you learn about the relationship she had with her sister, the life she had at the Shapeless Isles, and where it all tragically ended up for her and her sisters. I'll probably go more in depth on Ryder later when I'm talking about the intimate and personal slice of life scenes, but suffice to say that Fate Hollow Ataraxia does a lot for her character in this game, and it's just one example of how this game, in general, fleshes out the returning Fate Stay Night characters. Now, of course, not every slice of life scene in the game developed the characters, since there are slice of life scenes that are just played for pure comedy. Granted, the comedic scenes can also provide characterization, but there are some that are just so over the top that their only purpose is for the laughs. But these slice of life scenes still have merit to them due to, well, the comedy, with these scenes also not feeling like a waste due to that comedy and the variety there is within these comedic scenes. But let's delve more deeply into the slice of life scenes, shall we? Now, the slice of life scenes themselves can be divided into two sections, which is to say the comedy and the personal and intimate moments. Let's first talk about the comedy of the game. The comedy in Fate Hollow Ataraxia is just outstanding. The game is just a lot of fun, with it got me laughing a lot more times than I thought I was going to when I booted up Fate Hollow Ataraxia. The jokes, the scenario that leads to the jokes are just a lot of fun to read through. One element that I love in the comedy is how inventive it is in crafting unusual situations out of a setting and premise that's pretty ordinary. The way how the game escalates these normal situations into full-blown escapades is incredibly fun. That's not to say there aren't comedic segments where the events are more down to earth and low-key, because there is. In fact, I would say a decent amount of comedic scenes in the game are pretty down to earth, with the comedy being based on character banter rather than over-the-top and crazy scenarios. I'm just saying there are still some remarkably imaginative scenarios in Fate Hollow Ataraxia, with those scenarios being a whole lot of fun to experience. One such example is the scene where Shirou classmates are practicing for a school play. Now you might think this scenario is a typical scene for a slice of life setting, but add in how the servants are playing a part in this play, as well as how the script is this crazy version of Momotaro that was penned by Rin Tosaka herself, and yeah, you just got a scenario that's a ton of fun to read through due to both the surrealness in seeing the servants participating in the school play, and with seeing just how absurd this version of Momotaro is. Then there's the entire theater segment of the game, where Shirou and Ryder go to see a movie, with what you see in that movie being just batshit insane. It's just such a bizarre and dreamlike experience. I can probably name a few more scenarios off the top of my head, but I think I made my point. There are just some incredibly imaginative situations in the game that are just both fun and funny to read through, with them doing a great job of providing variety to the other comedic scenes that are driven by character banter. Speaking of character banter, let's talk about the character interaction now. The character interaction in this game is just simply fantastic. Each character just got such strong personalities and great chemistry with each other that it's a lot of fun seeing how these distinct characters react not only to the situation at hand, but also to each other. Like there's this great scene that involves Lancer and Archer just fishing in the docks. Now you would think this scene would be mundane, since it's just fishing. But the fact that Archer and Lancer are holding their usual spiel on what is supposed to be this relaxing hobby, and ultimately seeing Archer being this big kid on how he's winning, and seeing Lancer just being tired of Archer's shit, is what makes this scene as funny and enjoyable as it is. The character dynamic in this game in general is just fantastic and is one of the reasons why the game is as funny as it is. The comedy also excels at subverting our expectations. The game overall is just really good at playing with our expectations in general, whether it be comedic or dramatic, but I thought I would bring it up here since there are some hilarious moments done in Fate Hollow Ataraxia with how the game plays with expectations. One such example is the scene in the antique store where we see Ryder and Caster arguing about whose occupation is harder, with us getting detailed retellings about the hardships that each of them faced while doing their job, with it just being hilarious witnessing these heroic spirits of yore that have such trouble on what is an ordinary occupation. It's such a believable and funny subversion of these characters, and it's just great to see the comedy keep building up from that point, especially when Saber comes onto the scene. That's not to say that comedy is the only thing that the slice of life scene nails. It also got the more down-to-earth, slow, and intimate scenes down pat as well, with there being scenes that have this warm and low-key moments to them that allow characters to interact with each other very naturally. With there being a lot of great characterization, touching interactions, and even poignancy in these moments that make these characters as interesting and likable as they are. One such example is the interaction between Shirou and Taiga where they're talking about Shirou's future, where in this conversation, you see how much Taiga does understand and trust Shirou, and that despite the bickering they have with each other, they are still family, which is very heartwarming to see. Another example is the various interactions that Shirou has with Sakura, detailing how far she has come from the original game, with you seeing that despite still being the kindly, soft-spoken, and somewhat shy girl that she has become more assertive. You see this in how she's able to speak her mind more freely now, and how Sakura can put forth her own opinions and be able to stand by them firmly. With you seeing this not only in her interactions with Shirou and the gang at the house, but also with how she acts as the current captain of the archery club, with this aspect being great to see, as we can see how the events of Heaven's Feel have affected Sakura, and how she is currently trying to live her life as best she can alongside her loved ones, with us seeing how she is actively seeking happiness on her own, with this aspect being great to see having played through Fate Stay Night. The last example that I'm going to talk about is the conversation Shirou has with Saber at the docks, with them talking about the sea of Saber's hometown, and the impact that one's hometown has to an individual as they grow up. I love this conversation. It's intimate, it provides good characterization as it gives us insight into Saber's hometown and what her thoughts on the sea were when she was alive, with that aspect alone being fascinating on its own, given Saber's true identity. This conversation also has this quiet atmosphere to it that gets you sucked in, with how there's no in-game music to it, with the only sound you hear are the characters talking and the sound of the waves that you hear from the docks, which overall give this feeling of reflection into the conversation, which is appropriate given what the characters are doing in this scene. Just a well done event overall. These scenes really do a great job in not only providing great and even unique characterization, but also giving excellent character interaction to get us to like these characters as much as we do. Just so good. These scenes are also a nice change of pace from the zany and over-the-top comedic scenes that are in the game, which allows you to catch your breath and just slowly get absorbed into the intimate character moments. Albeit pacing altogether is hard to judge in this game with how the game is structured, with how the structure of the game during the slice of life segments gets you to choose what type of events you want, and you could just get comedic scenes 4 times in a row, or these intimate moments 4 times in a row. But still good there is variety in the slice of life moments so that you don't get tired of the game delivering you the same type of content repeatedly, even though it's well written. I also really love that in these slice of life moments, we do get to explore characters that didn't have much of a role in the original game, and we get to see them interact more, such as Ayako, the track and field team members, Sella and Lizret, etc. There's even some new characters that gets introduced in Fate Hollow Ataraxia that not only expand on the pre-existing characters, but also got personalities, backstories, and depth on their own. Well, some of them. Well, more so on the non-student side than the student side. Like with the introduction of Ryder's sisters and understanding the relationship the siblings had with each other and how each other's presence ultimately helped save them in a way, and how they all had affection toward each other despite how Ryder's sister teased and even made fun of Ryder. With this aspect of Ryder and her sister's relationship especially being important to understanding the tragedy behind Ryder's character. So yeah, I do like how the side characters in the game do get explored in this game. With that said, the student side characters are still a lot of fun to read through, like with Issei, Ayako, the track and field team members. It's just that not a lot of depth is added to their characters. But the last thing I'll probably talk about regarding these slice of life scenes is its best aspect, which is to say the slice of life scenes that fleshes out the master and servants whose backstory was left up in the air in the previous game, namely Ryder, Caster, Kuzuki, and even Lancer to a degree. These scenes are just brilliantly written. These are the scenes that let us dive into the past of these characters and see the core events that make these characters who they are. Within these scenes, we see the life of betrayal that Medea had to live due to the curse that made her unconditionally be in love with the hero Jason, and seeing what became of that life, witnessing how she was eventually betrayed and abandoned in a foreign land, with us seeing what Medea's original wish was back when she was alive after such an ordeal, before the time she met the master that would change her outlook and wish to such a degree that she would seek to be beside him rather than fulfilling what was essentially her original wish and only wish that she had when she was alive. A wish that was ultimately doomed to not come true in her lifetime. We see Kuzuki's inhuman and machine-like upbringing, seeing what he felt or didn't felt during that past life, and how his entire life changed when he met his servant by pure chance at that night near Ryudo Temple. How upon seeing Caster, Kuzuki felt something inside him move, felt an emotion within him that he never felt before, with us ultimately finding out what his one regret and wish was at the end, with those revelations giving even greater gravitas to his actions during the Fate Stay Night storylines. We see more in depth not only how Ryder thinks of herself, especially with how she has this negative outlook on herself, but also why Ryder is as devoted to Sakura as she is. How that devotion ultimately stems from Ryder's own experiences when she was mortal, Specifically, when Ryder was forced to walk the tragic path of a monster that was laid before her when she was alive, with that path not being created by her own volition, with us seeing where that path ultimately took her, with Ryder's devotion and loyalty coming from how Ryder sees in Sakura a kindred spirit, and wanting to ultimately save Sakura from meeting the same end that Ryder did when she was alive. These scenes overall are just awesome, not only bringing a layer of depth to these characters that we've known from the original Fate Stay Night, but are also excellent in conveying a story that makes you want to keep on reading to find out more about them. These segments in general are intriguing, moving, melancholy, intense, even heart-wrenching when you see how these unique individuals end up being the people they are now. Now let's move on to talking about the main plot of the game. I know that I spent a lot of time talking about the slice of life moments in Fate Hollow Ataraxia, but a majority of the game is experiencing these slice of life moments. Okay, so what can be said about the main plot of the game then? Well, I guess the first thing to say is that a lot of the main plot revolves around Bazette, her new servant, and their journey in this restarted Holy Grail War. There are segments of the main story where we are focused on Shirou as he tries to find out what's going on with the weird occurrences that are happening in town and how it's all connected to this restarted Holy Grail War, but a lot of the focus on the main plot is on Bazette, her new servant, their interactions, and on the mystery behind this restarted Holy Grail War. Not so much on the fighting part of the Grail War though. Now don't get me wrong, there are fight scenes in the story, with the fight scenes themselves being well done, with them not only being suspenseful and tense to read through due to the gritty nature of the fights, but also because there's a sense of grandeur to them that gets you sucked in, with that sense of grandeur ultimately being a result of the game's excellent ability to convey just how powerful these mages and heroic spirits are in comparison to the feats of an ordinary human. There's also quite a bit of creativity to be found in some of these fight scenes as well, most notably in the inventive ways that each character uses their unique abilities in the context of the battle. I think the fight that exemplifies this is the church battle, where you see Bazette and her new servant are combining their abilities in a way that allows them to capitalize on the strengths of each ability while also eliminating the shortcomings each ability have on their own. I know that sounds vague, but I still don't want to spoil how that fight goes down due to how good it is. But yeah, there are fight scenes in this game, and they're great to read through as few as they are. But the focus isn't on the fighting or on how Bazette maneuvers strategically throughout the Grail War. It's more about the slow moments where Bazette and her servant talk and learn about each other when they're out about town at night doing recon, with there being a lot of character building, character interaction, mystery, and atmosphere in the main plot to keep you hooked to find out just who are these strange individuals that we are following alongside Shirou, and how do they factor in this restarted Holy Grail War. Albeit the main plot does have a focus on finding out the mystery behind the restarted Holy Grail War itself and figuring out how it's connected to both the dark beast that roams Fuyuki City and the time loop that seems to be happening, not to mention figuring out how the mysterious Karen factor in all of this. But a lot of the focus in the main plot is spent on Bazette and her new servant, and not only learning how they factor in this restarted Holy Grail War, but also seeing their interactions as well as learning about them as individuals. As a result, the game gives us some good character interaction between the two that's enjoyable to watch, as well as being enlightening in regards to learning about these characters, such as seeing the professional and good-natured Bazette being taken aback by some of the replies and actions that her new servant does, which displays some of her more softer and even vulnerable features, like seeing how awkward and even critical she gets when she tries to talk about herself, which gives light to this insecurity that Bazette has in herself. Or seeing the sarcastic, cynical, and laid-back persona of Bazette's servant displaying his kid-like curiosity and honesty when he tries to learn more about Bazette. There's just some entertaining and endearing character interaction done with both Bazette and her servant due to how different they are as individuals, with those differences allowing them to bring out qualities within each other that you wouldn't expect to see. With those hidden character traits not only displaying that there's more to these characters than you initially think, but it also gives some grounds for Bazette and her new servant to connect with each other, for them to have chemistry with each other, which makes their interaction to be interesting to read through, not only because it's pretty entertaining to watch them talk with each other, but to also learn what makes these characters tick, to ultimately find out the thought process behind these intriguing characters, as well as discovering not only how they become the people they are now, but also learning what their wish for the Holy Grail is, with the journey of finding out the answer to those questions being an emotionally charged one. Overall, the character writing for both Bazette and her new servant is just great, with the two being the main appeal for the main plot. Now the next thing the main plot nails is its atmosphere. It's simply wonderful. The main plot of Fate Hollow Ataraxia is just dripping with this palpable atmosphere that exudes the sense of mystery, calmness, and melancholy. It's a different type of atmosphere compared to Tsukihime and Fate Stay Night, but it's still well done in how it just immerses you into the visual novel as you read through it. There's just this feeling of nostalgia, contemplation, and mystery to the atmosphere that ultimately propels you to find out more about the characters and their situation. It's a very inviting atmosphere that's harsh when it needs to be, but also knows when it needs to be tranquil to let the intimate moments shine. The plot thread that revolves around the mystery of the restarted Holy Grail War is also decently done. For one, there's a fair amount of intrigue within this plot thread that can keep you guessing on how this restarted Grail War came to be, with there being a lot of build-up, enigma, and atmosphere to keep you invested, to keep you asking the core questions that make up this mystery. Like, why has the 5th Holy Grail War been restarted? What are these mysterious dark beasts that invade the town on the 4th night? Why is there a time loop, and why does it only last for 4 days? How in the world can doing something in one time loop affect the other time loops, etc. The game remarkably does a great job at building up the mystery and intrigue that you just sucked in to find out more, to find out how all these strange occurrences that are happening in the story are connected, and why they are happening like they are, with the payoff to the mystery being pretty good, with there being good character moments that fleshes out and develop characters, good plot twist that changes up the dynamic of the story and characters to keep you invested, there being good foreshadowing, and the message the game was building up to was executed well in the context of the story, with that message being about having the inner drive to be able to move on to the future, that at the end of the day, that drive to move onward, to strive to become a better you every day, is something to be admired, and that living in a false reality of your own making and just reliving the same events over and over again is ultimately detrimental if you never move on from that thinking. Well, that's at least my interpretation of the message in the game when I read through it to completion for the first time. I might be off base. Regardless, the main plot of the game is good overall. It got great atmosphere to it, great characters, the mystery behind the restarted Holy Grail War is done relatively well, the fight scenes are great, and it's overall an enjoyable ride from start to finish. I feel like I'm missing something. Oh yeah, in case if you're wondering, there are eroge scenes in this game, aka sex scenes, though most of them are optional if you don't want to see them. Most of them are in a separate mode from the main story, with you having to select Eclipse mode to access them. Note that I say most of them, because there is one in the main story. Now I can't judge the eroge scenes overall because I've only seen 3 of them on a whim. Well, one of them due to being in the main story, but the other 2 I saw purely on a whim, which was namely Saber's and Sakura's. So I can't judge the eroge scenes fairly. What I will say though, is that the eroge scenes that you do get in the main story, it's kinda uncomfortable to read through. Now it's intentional, but just giving you guys a heads up. I also won't be covering the comedic side story that's in the Harufuda minigame, because, well, I suck at Harufuda. But from what small snippets I've seen of the side story in YouTube, it seems like a fun story. So with all that is said about the overall story of Fate Hollow Ataraxia, is there any problems to be had in the game? Any concerns, or possibly any factors that can throw some people off from having read the original Fate Stay Night? Well, regarding the latter, the fact how a considerable number of scenes in Fate Hollow Ataraxia being slice of life scenes might throw some people off, like I said before. That's not to say the original Fate Stay Night didn't have slice of life scenes, it did, but not to the amount you see in Fate Hollow Ataraxia. Now this is not a bad thing, I'm just saying it's not what most people will expect from a sort of sequel to Fate Stay Night, if they were expecting a sequel at all. There's also the small fact that Fate Hollow Ataraxia is also not standalone. which I think some people might mind, but I didn't mind this personally. But as far as actual problems are concerned, well, outside the fact that you're not just into slice of life, well, for one, there are a few dull moments in the slice of life scenes in the game, where I felt not enough is done to make an event interesting all the way through, whether it be because the scene repeats certain elements, or with how some scenes don't have much going on, with there not being much characterization and world building. Example of the latter being scenes in the game that just used to build up for a future event, with those moments being boring, due to how nothing's happening in them except for Shirou just walking through those areas. It's good that these scenes are there for build up, though I do think there are a tad too many of them, with how there are multiple parts to these segments, which can make them feel like they overstayed their welcome. Now, these dull moments in the story only happens a few times, but it's pretty noticeable when it does happen. So yeah, scenes like these can be boring to read through. Overall, Fate Hollow Ataraxia was great to experience from start to finish for me. There are a few dull moments here and there, but it's overall extremely well done. The slice of life moments, for one, was excellent and varied, with it not only allowing us to see these characters of the past game to interact within a different type of setting, but as well expanding a lot on the characters that weren't in the limelight in the original Fate Stay Night. The character interactions are also gold in this game, whether that be the comedic scenes that make you laugh out loud, or with the personal moments where you get to know these characters intimately. The main plot was interesting, with it having strong characters, an intriguing mystery revolving around why there's a restarted Holy Grail War, marvelous atmosphere, and compelling themes and messages ingrained within the story that makes the main plot worthwhile to read through. The presentation also does a great job of complementing the story. Additionally, I like how there was more gameplay in Fate Hollow Ataraxia with the minigames you could play. In the end, I would recommend Fate Hollow Ataraxia to anyone who have read through the original Fate Stay Night and haven't tried Fate Hollow Ataraxia yet. Granted, Fate Hollow Ataraxia is probably a sequel that most people weren't expecting, especially with how Fate Stay Night had a pretty conclusive end with both the Heaven's Feel ending and the end of the Dream segment, but I will say that Fate Hollow Ataraxia is still worth reading through. It managed to not only have its own story that it wants to tell, with it being a damn compelling story, but also expand on the characters that we know and love, and does it in a way that's fascinating to read through.